the object of psychology. There was no more the science of mental life, but the science of behavior. And behavior was, sets of responses that were under the influence of stimuli. Everything was under the operationalism, prejudice, etc. We are not going to develop behaviorism. But they also, even if their reductionism was behavioralist, operationalist, when they were asked about the role of the organism in the mental life, they just pushed that question to the neurologist or to the neurobiologist. The organism has a role, but that role is explained by neurobiology. And the neurobiology that imported the behaviorism was neurobiology based mainly on the Ivan Pavlov contributions. Finally, in the, following change of paradigms in psychology from behaviorism to cognitivism, in cognitivism very much influenced not only by the crisis that was experiencing the behaviorism, internal crisis, but also for external influences like the sciences of computation, crisis in philosophy of mind and philosophy of science, and other factors. Cognitivism that was directly towards the study of mental life was had also important influences from the field of neuroscience. In that sense, from the very beginning, the certain neurologists and neuroscientists like Lashley or Pitts and McCulloch and Ashby and others were thinking how to implement in a brain the things that cognitive scientists, including cognitive psychologists, were attributing to the mind, like understanding cognition and internal processes as computation, how the brain computes. So they were also open to that kind of neuropsychological relation. And within the cognitivism, it's especially important to mention the 80s of the last century, the role played by the connectionists. That, again, they went to this kind of isomorphism, a little tired of the digital computer model for the mind, tried to base their models of the mind, because they were cognitivists, in the brain, in that kind of isomorphism, even if they want to study that in a kind of functional way. Precisely during the cognitivist era, it occurs the appearance at the end of the 80s, mainly in the 90s of the last century. Remember that the 1990s were the decade of the brain, and even Michael Gazzaniga considered that was not enough to declare the 21st century as the century of the brain. Then the appearance of this new kind of movement called cognitive neuroscience, in which both disciplines want to match completely, but is what we have to see what has occurred apart from that. The main aspects of the possibility of this cognitive neuroscience came from the importance of the high-tech methodologies to explore the brain that I mentioned before. For the first time, the human brain could be studied in vivo, just in action, without having to wait for surgery or for necropsy or for special circumstances. So we have instruments to explore the brain. And I think that has been a big achievement of science and technology, but is what this neuroboom means, that after that, or because of that, then in less than 20 years, or more or less 20 years, has been a complete explosion of applications of these technologies to different kind of things. These technologies primarily were developed to face and to deal with the problems found in neurology, in clinical and basic neurology, to study and explore the brain anatomically and physiologically. But very, very soon, because they allowed the exploration of the brain during the performance of different actions during the normal life, well, inside the tube in many occasions, like in fMRI or in the PET technologies, or with something here, but at least in relatively normal conditions and situations, then it was kind of very tentative and very attractive to apply that technology to any kind of task and performances that human beings can do, and are especially recognized for that. Not only in psychology, the kind of connection or the marriage between neurology and psychology, neuropsychology was very old, from the last part of, during the 19th century, that I have, well, omitted not to make this very long, phrenology and the big advances in the second part of the 19th century of the clinical neuropsychology by neurologists mainly, like Broca, Wernicke, etc. But no, this is something that goes beyond that, in the sense that not only psychological phenomena or psychiatric phenomena, but also social phenomena, economical phenomena, religious phenomena, anthropological phenomena were subject to the treatment of these things. And the logic of the research was very clear, was very direct. The thing is, what is the power of the research? What is contributing to our knowledge, to the advancement of our knowledge? It's just to explore and to detect the activation of different brain regions and different connections when humans are performing different kind of tasks. And these are a dozen of applications, but you can find, for example, I have not put the oldest ones, like neuropsychology, that probably was the first to make that connection. But since it didn't depend from the explosion of these technologies, I had not included neuropsychology or neurolinguistics. Luria entitled a book, Neurolinguistics, much before, long before this explosion of neuroculture has arrived. There is a colleague in the Faculty of Medicine here in the University Complutense, Francisco Mora, has written several books on this neuroculture, saying that the neuroculture is going to save us from all our sins and from all our ignorance and from all our mythical thought. And it applies to everything. It's very close to here. I expect that he's not here now. But even neurophilosophy, neurotheology also only means, and they are very curious, in the newspapers you can find that the nuns of a monastery have been participating in research in Canada, for example, well, with electrodes or with magnetic resonance, just to explore their brains when they have been induced in a mystical state or in prayer or in certain moments in which they are, and then you can see how parts of the brain are lighting, and not always the same, but many regions of the brain are lighting. But anyway, these are supposed to be the foundations, the neurological foundations of religion, of religious feelings. And the same with any other field of application of this. There are neuromagic. One former student of here, Martinez Conde? Susana Martinez Conde was a student of mine, and now is the leader and the chief of a very important and very significant and relevant laboratory of perception in Arizona. And he writes a lot publishes a lot in Scientific American. He has several articles, several papers about neuromagic. He has made a very interesting connection between psychology of perception and magic, and illusionism. And then, since he has a lot of means to register that brain activity, he has written several papers, and I don't know if a book about neuromagic. This neurolit crit, I found it in the El País, but I have reviewed it in Google, and I have found many more references. Apparently, lit comes from literary criticism. So is the nervous or neural activity of people whereas they are reading books or exposed to literary input to see how our preferences are reflected in our brain activity. As you see, is a big deal of applications, and a big amount of applications in this neuroculture. I don't want to enter into a detailed analysis of all this, but just to remit to these references that I have mentioned at the beginning: Neuromania by Legrenzi and Humilità. There is a very interesting book by MIT Press in 2011, Mind and Brain, a critical appraisal the cognitive neuroscience by Williams Utal. Williams Utal, with 2 T's, wrote a book 5 or 6 years ago called The New Phrenology, and he tries to connect the goals of this new neuro explosion to the old with very different and more profitable means and instruments. The old expectations of the phrenology instaurated in Germany by Frank Gall, the father of the phrenology that was so much discredited. But if you think a little sometimes about this new neuroscience in most cases is not very much different from that old phrenology. That's what Williams Utal tries to express. It's a new phrenology with new means and instruments. We don't have to have those anthropometric laboratories in which Frank Gall measured the size of the bones of the skull, but now we have techniques very reliable of the exploration of the brain directly. The thing is that what has contributed this technology to our knowledge of the relations between mind and brain. Many correlations, but even if you read the book by William Utal, with a lot of variability and with that problem of they had to face the modern neuroscience, how to deal with the one-to-many relations and the many-to-one relations. That means one region is involved in many different psychological functions, and many regions had to deal or had some implication and involvement in certain unitary kind of processes. And that introduces a lot of questioning about the affirmed knowledge about the relations between mind and brain. And probably because at the end, what we are registering with these new modern technologies, think about that, is not directly the activity of the neurons, that can be detected directly with single-cell registers, like Hubel and Biesel did in their perceptual and visual studies.